In just 37 seconds, one of Britain's most beloved actors would deliver a verbal haymaker that left Lorraine Kelly speechless, her carefully constructed facade crumbling on live television. What started as polite conversation about Colin Firth's latest film project spiraled into a blistering takedown that exposed years of simmering tension between the Oscar winner and daytime television's supposed sweetheart. By the time those 37 seconds were up, Firth had called out Kelly's interviewing tactics in terms so brutal that ITV executives were frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, knowing they were witnessing career-defining television that would dominate headlines within the hour. The atmosphere in the Lorraine Kelly studio felt different from the moment Colin Firth walked onto the set, where guests typically basked in Kelly's manufactured warmth. Firth carried himself with an air of barely contained skepticism. His handshake was perfunctory, his smile polite but distant as he settled into the guest chair across from Kelly's trademark bright setup. "Colin, lovely to have you back with us," Kelly began, her voice dripping with the syrupy enthusiasm that had made her a daytime television fixture for decades. "You look absolutely wonderful. Doesn't he look wonderful, everyone?" The studio audience offered polite applause, but Firth's expression remained neutral. "Thank you, Lorraine," he replied, his tone measured and professional, though those familiar with his interviews could detect something sharper lurking beneath the surface. Kelly launched into her prepared talking points with characteristic vigor. "Now, your new film, The Forgotten Garden, I have to say, when I watched it, I was absolutely captivated. The way you portrayed James, this complex character dealing with loss and redemption, it really spoke to me on such a personal level." Firth's eyebrow arched slightly. "Have you actually watched it, Lorraine?" The question hung in the air for a beat too long. Kelly's smile wavered almost imperceptibly before she recovered with a laugh that sounded just a fraction too loud. "Of course I have. What a silly question. I wouldn't invite you on without seeing your work, would I?" "I wouldn't know," Firth replied evenly. "You tell me." The studio audience sensed the shift in energy, the comfortable rhythm of daytime television suddenly feeling less comfortable. Kelly pressed forward, but her confidence had taken its first hit. "Well, obviously I've seen it, Colin. That's why I'm asking about your preparation for such an emotionally demanding role. How did you tap into that vulnerability we see from James throughout the film?" Firth leaned back in his chair, studying Kelly with the intensity he typically reserved for his most challenging roles. "The film isn't called The Forgotten Garden, Lorraine. It's called The Silent Grove, and the character's name is Michael, not James. So, I'm curious, which film are you actually referring to?" The color drained from Kelly's face as the realization hit her. She'd been reading from the wrong research notes, mixing up Firth's current project with something else entirely. The professional mask she wore so expertly began to slip as she fumbled with her cards. "Oh, well, obviously I misspoke. We all know it's The Silent Grove, don't we?" she said, attempting to laugh off the error while shooting desperate glances toward her production team. Sometimes these titles just, you know how it is with so many projects. "No, actually, I don't know how it is," Firth replied, his voice gaining an edge that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "This is my life's work you're discussing. These aren't interchangeable titles or throwaway characters. When someone invites me onto their show to discuss my craft, I assume they've done the basic courtesy of learning what we're actually talking about." Kelly's famous composure began to fracture visibly. The warm maternal figure millions of viewers trusted was being systematically dismantled by an actor who clearly had no patience for lazy journalism. Her hands trembled slightly as she shuffled through her notes, looking for solid ground. "Of course, Colin, and I absolutely respect your work. I think there might have been some confusion with the research team, but let's talk about Michael. Your character Michael in The Silent Grove. The emotional journey he goes through is quite remarkable. Have you seen it?" Firth pressed again, his gaze unwavering. Kelly opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity in television time. Finally, she attempted to deflect. "Well, as I said, I found it very moving." "That's not what I asked," Firth interrupted, his voice cutting through Kelly's evasion like a blade. "It's a simple yes or no question, Lorraine. Have you watched The Silent Grove?" The tension in the studio was now palpable. Crew members exchanged worried glances while the audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing something unprecedented in daytime television. Kelly's carefully cultivated image as the nation's favorite interviewer was crumbling in real time, and everyone could see it happening. Kelly's voice cracked slightly as she tried one more deflection. Colin, I think you're being a bit unfair here. We have such limited time, and I'd rather focus on the wonderful work you've done. Unfair? Firth's voice rose just enough to signal that whatever restraint he'd been showing was about to disappear entirely. What's unfair is bringing someone onto your show under false pretenses. What's unfair is pretending to engage with their work when you can't even be bothered to learn the most basic facts about it. The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. Kelly's face had gone from pale to flushed as she realized her usual tactics weren't working. Firth wasn't backing down, wasn't playing along with the polite fiction that daytime television typically required. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would make Kelly's research blunder look like a minor inconvenience. Kelly, desperate to regain control of her show, decided to pivot to what she considered safer territory. Her voice took on a patronizing tone that would prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation. You know what, Colin? I think you're being unnecessarily hostile here. This is daytime television. We're here to have a bit of fun, connect with the audience. Maybe you've been in those serious, dramatic roles for so long that you've forgotten how to just relax and enjoy a casual chat. The words hung in the air like a lit fuse approaching dynamite. Firth's expression shifted from professional irritation to something far more dangerous. Several crew members actually took a step back from their positions, instinctively sensing that Kelly had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. Forgotten how to relax? Firth's voice was deadly quiet now, the kind of controlled fury that seasoned actors use to terrify audiences. Lorraine, let me make something crystal clear to you. I've been acting professionally for over 30 years. I've worked with some of the most respected directors and actors in the world. I've won an Oscar, a BAFTA, and countless other awards not because I'm uptight, but because I take my craft seriously. Kelly tried to interrupt with a nervous laugh. Oh, Colin, I didn't mean... No, you clearly did mean it. Firth cut her off, his composure cracking to reveal the full force of his indignation. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my work, then admitted you haven't bothered to do the most basic preparation. When I called you out on it, your response was to suggest that I'm the problem for expecting professional standards. The studio audience was witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the polite disagreement that occasionally surfaced on talk shows. This was a complete breakdown of the unspoken contract between host and guest. Kelly's face was now visibly flushed, sweat beginning to bead on her forehead under the studio lights. I think you're overreacting just a bit, Kelly said, her voice wavering as she tried to salvage what was left of her authority. We all make little mistakes. There's no need to be so dramatic about it. That word, dramatic, was the final straw. Firth leaned forward in his chair, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made the studio cameras automatically focus tighter on his face. Dramatic? You think holding you accountable for basic journalistic integrity is dramatic? Tell me, Lorraine, how many other guests have sat in this chair while you pretended to know about their work? How many actors, musicians, writers have been subjected to your lazy, disrespectful approach to what you laughably call interviewing? Kelly's carefully maintained facade was disintegrating completely now. The motherly warmth that defined her brand had evaporated, replaced by visible panic as she realized she was losing control not just of the interview, but of her entire professional reputation in real time. Colin, please, I think we should what? Should pretend this is acceptable? Firth's voice rose to a level that made several audience members gasp audibly. Should I sit here and smile while you treat my life's work like some throwaway entertainment for your morning coffee crowd? Should I pretend that your complete lack of preparation isn't a slap in the face to every actor who's ever trusted this show with their story? The production team was in full crisis mode now. Producers were frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, trying to signal for commercial breaks, for damage control, for anything that might stop the public execution they were witnessing. But Kelly, in her desperation, made another fatal error. You know what, Colin? She said, her voice taking on a sharp edge as her famous composure finally shattered completely. Maybe the problem isn't with my preparation. Maybe the problem is with actors like you who think you're too good for daytime television. Maybe you're just another pretentious lovey who looks down on shows like mine because we don't kiss your arse enough." The studio fell into absolute silence. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, unsure whether they should keep filming what was clearly becoming a career-ending moment for one of Britain's most recognizable television personalities. Kelly had just called one of the country's most respected actors a pretentious lovey on live television, and everyone knew there would be no coming back from that. Firth sat back in his chair, a cold smile spreading across his face that was somehow more terrifying than his anger had been. "There it is," he said softly, but his voice carried clearly through the stunned studio. "The real Lorraine Kelly, everyone. Not the warm maternal figure you've been selling to the British public for decades. Just another bitter television personality who thinks basic respect is optional." Kelly realized immediately that she'd gone too far, but the damage was already done. "Colin, I didn't mean—" "Oh, but you did mean it," Firth interrupted, his voice now carrying the full weight of his classical training. "That little outburst just revealed everything we need to know about how you really view your guests, your audience, and your profession. You think we should be grateful for the privilege of appearing on your show, regardless of how poorly you treat us." The confrontation had reached a point where everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing television history in the making. Kelly's reputation was disintegrating before their eyes, and Firth was just getting started. His next words would push the situation beyond any hope of resolution. Firth stood up slowly from his chair, his movement deliberate and commanding. The simple act of rising seemed to drain all the energy from Kelly, who visibly shrank back in her seat. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades commanding stages and film sets across the world. "You want to know what's really pretentious, Lorraine?" Firth's words cut through the studio like a knife. "What's pretentious is building a career on fake warmth and manufactured sincerity. What's pretentious is sitting behind that desk day after day, pretending to care about your guests while you can't even be bothered to learn their names correctly." Kelly's hands were visibly shaking now as she tried to maintain some semblance of control. "Colin, please, let's just—" "No," Firth's voice boomed across the studio, silencing her completely. "You've had your say. You called me pretentious, so let me tell you what I see when I look at you. I see someone who's built an entire career on mediocrity, who's convinced the British public that lazy journalism and surface-level questions count as entertainment." The studio audience was completely mesmerized, watching Britain's most beloved morning television host being systematically destroyed by one of its most respected actors. Kelly's face had gone from flushed to ashen, and tears were beginning to form in her eyes. "You know what the real tragedy is?" Firth continued, his voice now carrying a devastating calm. "There are hundreds of brilliant journalists in this country who would kill for your platform. People who would actually research their guests, who would ask meaningful questions, who would treat their subjects with the respect they deserve. Instead, we get you, someone who thinks charisma can substitute for competence." Kelly tried one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "I've been doing this show for years, Colin. I've interviewed thousands of guests, and most of them have been perfectly happy with—" "Happy with what?" Firth exploded, his composure finally cracking completely. "Happy with being patronized? Happy with having their work misrepresented? Happy with sitting through your vapid questions while you pretend to give a damn about what they have to say?" The production team was in complete chaos now. Producers were shouting into their headsets, trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial, end the segment, or just let the carnage continue. The audience sat in stunned silence, knowing they were witnessing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Kelly's voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke again. I work very hard on this show. I care about my guests." "Do you?" Firth's question hung in the air like an accusation. "Because caring would involve preparation. Caring would involve respect. Caring would involve treating your guests like human beings instead of content to fill your morning slot." The tears Kelly had been fighting finally began to fall, her carefully applied makeup starting to run under the harsh studio lights. But Firth wasn't finished. 3 decades of dealing with unprofessional interviewers, lazy journalists, and superficial media personalities had led to this moment, and he was going to make it count. "You want to know what's really sad about all this, Lorraine? You could have been good at this. You have a platform millions of people watch every morning. You could have used it to showcase real talent, to ask meaningful questions, to actually contribute something worthwhile to the cultural conversation. Instead, you chose to phone it in, day after day, year after year. Kelly was openly crying now, her public persona completely shattered. Please, Colin, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. One mistake? Firth's laugh was bitter and cold. This isn't one mistake, Lorraine. This is a pattern. This is who you really are when the cameras are rolling and you think no one will call you out on it. The studio had fallen so quiet that every sob from Kelly was audible to the audience. Firth looked around the room, taking in the shocked faces of the crew, the stunned silence of the audience, and the broken woman sitting across from him. I've been in this business long enough to recognize authenticity when I see it, he said, his voice returning to that deadly calm that was somehow more frightening than his anger. And what I see here is someone who's been faking it for so long that she's forgotten what genuine professional respect looks like. Kelly's voice was barely audible through her tears. I really am sorry, Colin. I didn't mean for this to happen. That's the problem, Firth replied, straightening his jacket with deliberate precision. You never mean for anything to happen. You just coast through these interviews, hoping your guests will be polite enough not to notice how little effort you've put in. Well, I noticed. And now everyone else has noticed too. He began walking toward the edge of the set, his exit clearly imminent. Kelly made one final desperate plea. Colin, please don't leave like this. Can't we just… Firth stopped and turned back to her, his expression a mixture of disappointment and disgust. Can't we just what? Pretend this didn't happen? Smile for the cameras and act like everything's fine? That's exactly the kind of fake bullshit that got us here in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. Firth looked directly into the main camera, addressing the viewing audience with the same intensity he'd brought to his greatest film roles. To anyone watching at home, he said, his voice clear and commanding, you deserve better than this. You deserve interviewers who respect their guests, who do their homework, who treat the arts and entertainment industry with the professionalism it deserves. Don't settle for lazy television just because it's comfortable. With that, he turned his back on Kelly and walked off the set, leaving behind a destroyed television host, a traumatized production crew, and an audience that knew they'd just witnessed one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. Kelly sat alone at her desk, tears streaming down her face, unable to speak as the cameras continued to roll. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before a producer finally had the presence of mind to call for a commercial break. The damage was done. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation would be circulating on social media, and by evening, every major news outlet in Britain would be covering what was already being called the most brutal takedown in television history. Firth had walked away with his dignity intact, having delivered a masterclass in how to hold the media accountable for their standards. For Lorraine Kelly, the aftermath would be swift and merciless. But in that moment, sitting alone in her destroyed studio, she finally understood the difference between authentic journalism and the hollow performance she'd been delivering for years.